الحمد لله رب العالمين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين والعاقبة للمتقين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وأزواجه وذرياته ومن اهتدى بهديه إلى يوم الدين. ترك عن المحجة البيضاء ليلها كنهارها لا يزيغ عنها إلا هالك. ثم أما بعد. So alhamdulillah, we finished the first hadith in 2 sessions, and we could have probably to give it its full due, we could have done several more lectures about it, because one of the things about the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is that he is utiya jawami' al-kalim, utiya jawami' al-kalim, which means that in a few utterances, a few words, much meaning can be conveyed. And one of the things that the Arabs used to boast about even before Islam is their eloquence. And there was no one who was more eloquent than the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And the Arabs used to say al-ijazatu al-balagatu al-ijaz, that eloquence, rhetoric, is conciseness. خير الكلام ما قل ودل. The best speech is that which is little but it's meaningful. So many of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, there are a few words in it, but you can spend so much time on all of the ramifications and the attendant meanings that can be inferred from there, and how our ulama interpreted them, and even some of the difference of opinion and so forth. So to really avail oneself of the meanings of the primary source text for us, which is knowing the Quran and Sunnah, the more one is well versed in obviously the language, and then also the Islamic disciplines of creed or theology and fiqh and usul al-fiqh and hadith mustalah, ilm al-ma'ani from balagha, all of these things, then the more meanings that will become accessible. And the Quran very much is like that. So the accessibility of the Quran is going to be based, one, on your ability to be a receptacle for those meanings. So that involves a spiritual aspect. That's why people who are distracted, who are sinful, who are things like this, the Quran doesn't come alive to them, and it doesn't feel like that much of a miraculous book, because they're veiled from it. And the same thing with the hadith. The hadith itself also, being the most eloquent speech a human being can pronounce, can come up with, also will be inaccessible in some aspects, except to those people who approach it in the proper manner. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those people, inshallah. So the next hadith is taken from Kitab al-Iman, and the title there is Bab Halawat al-Iman, or the sweetness of faith. And this hadith is narrated by Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu. First hadith was Sayyidah Aisha, next hadith Anas ibn Malik. And Anas ibn Malik was one of those Sahaba who spent 10 years, as in his own words, 10 years serving the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And he is the one who narrates that the Prophet ﷺ never said to him, for anything that he did, why did you do it? And for anything he failed to do, why did you fail to do it? فَلَمْ يَقُلْ لَهُ لِشَيْءٍ فَعَلَهَ لِمَا فَعَلْتَ أَوْ لِشَيْءٍ لَمْ يَفْعَلْهُ لِمَا لَمْ تَفْعَلْ. And he was a young man, he was a boy, 10 years of age, and he served the Prophet ﷺ for 10 years. And he was the one who, after the passing of the Prophet ﷺ, he remarked, we did not wipe our hands from the dirt of bearing the Prophet ﷺ, except we no longer knew who we were. We didn't recognize ourselves. Anas ibn Malik. And Anas ibn Malik, his mother told the Prophet ﷺ, make dua for him. You know, for a long life, and to have knowledge, and to be have wealth that he can give in charity. So the Prophet ﷺ made this dua for him, and he lived 99 years. So he died about 99 years of age. He had a long life, and it said that he had hundreds of children based upon the dua of the Prophet ﷺ, and he was also someone who gave much in charity from the barakah of dua Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And he was also the keeper of the sandals of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ after his death. ﷺ. And Anas ibn Malik, he would say that people would come to me and they would just come so that they can have, I would take out the sandals of the Prophet ﷺ so they may see them. So he kept this safekeeping, as did many of the other Sahaba. Aisha radiallahu anha kept the burda, which is the cloak of the Prophet ﷺ, and she remarked that people would come to look for the burda and wear it للإستشفاء, so they can be healed. Her words, not the words of the ulama after or anything like that, her words. So those people who say that, don't be involved with the relics of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and that's bid'ah and shirk, and that's not the deen that I know. So when someone loves something, they love everything about that thing, and they want to know all the little details about it. If mobs and swarms of mobs accompany Justin Bieber when he surrenders himself to the police, right, because they love him so much, we can't have the sandals or the cloak or sing the praises of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. They should deport that guy. I agree with that whole thing. Anyway. So, Anas narrates رضي الله عنه عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال: ثلاث من كن فيه وجد حلاوة الإيمان أن يكون الله ورسوله أحب إليه مما سواهما وأن يحب المرء لا يحبه إلا لله تعالى وأن يكره أن يعود في الكفر كما يكره أن يقذف في النار. Anas ibn Malik narrates that the Prophet ﷺ said, 3 things: if they are an individual, he will taste the sweetness of faith. I would say find, because the word wajada doesn't really mean taste, it means find, even though it has a meaning of taste, which is dhawq. That Allah and His Messenger are more beloved to him than everything else, that he loves a person, not loving him for anything other than the sake of Allah, and to hate or despise, to return to disbelief, just as he would hate to be thrown into the fire, not a fire, the fire. So here, this hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, probably the first thing that jumps out at us is this word that the Prophet ﷺ describes, halawa, sweetness. And halawa just means that. It means something that's sweet or pure, good, has all those meanings. Last week we talked about takhliya and tahliya. Same word, same root word. Tahliya meaning to provide something with something good after being emptying of the bad, to fill it up with good. That's tahliya. And we said takhliya is the opposite, which is to empty oneself of all negativities and distractions and so forth, so they can be prepared for the tahliya. So it's as if here it's describing a tahliya state. What's it like if you've done some takhliya, you've emptied yourself, right? You actually empty yourself of emptiness, because negative things make you empty, but you need to be in a state to receive the meanings. So what's it like when that happens? What are some of the signs? So the Prophet ﷺ said, ثلاث, 3 things. من كن فيه. So he says 3 things in someone. He didn't say a man, he didn't say a woman, he didn't even say a believer. He said in a person, you'll find these 3 things. And then wajada. And we said wajada means to find, like wujud, same word, wujdan, wujada. These are similar meanings, wujd. And the interesting thing about the word wajada, or if you use different verbal nouns, it has different meanings. So the same word wajada can mean wajada wujdanan or wajada wujudan. But if we look to the wujdan or the wujd, it means to find something by feeling. And sometimes it's used to to denote like a euphoria, like wujdan. Like you found something, but found something and it has made you almost devoid of your senses because of the level of happiness that you finding that thing. So here finding this halawa means to me it's not so much a intellectual exercise. Like I couldn't give you like a algorithm or a transcript of how to go about finding it, but it's something that's there and it's palpable. Now sweetness is a physical thing, generally speaking. So when we say something is sweet, it means something that we can taste, right? We don't say I see sweetness or I hear sweetness, except in a metaphorical sense, but we talk about tasting sweetness. So the sweetness of faith means it's a thing that can be as if it can be tasted. Most of the ulama, they said the sweetness here is something metaphorical, it can't be real, can't be physical. The compiler of these ahadith actually said it can be real, it can be physical. And he used a few examples. He said that when Bilal, radiallahu anhu, Bilal ibn Rabah, who was enslaved, and they sought to have him denounce Islam and to denounce the Prophet ﷺ, they took him to a very arid, sullen place outside of Mecca, and they laid him on the ground and put this huge rock on him. You know, if any of you have been to the Gulf in the summer, just even stepping on the ground is hot, you know, when it's really hot. So they put this huge rock on him and they wanted him to denounce Islam. And all he could say was, Ahad, Ahad. So Ibn Abi Jamrah said, his saying of Ahad is indicative that he didn't feel the pain. Physically, he didn't feel the pain. In fact, he was tasting the sweetness of the faith. He was completely oblivious to whatever state of pain that someone should have been in that state. How? Because he said, how else can you explain it? How else can you explain that state? And he had the rukhsa or the dispensation. He could have said what they wanted and doesn't take away anything from his iman, right? We have that dispensation, but he didn't take that, and he insisted. And he used a couple of other examples. One of the Sahaba was guarding during the Battle of the Trench when the Confederates had assembled, and they were about 10,000 strong, and people in Medina were maybe 3,000 maximum. And they built a trench that protected them from their open side, which was on the southern side, I think. So they guarded the trench because some of them tried to cross over, and the horses couldn't make it over. Some tried, fell in, so forth. So all the Meccans, the Quraysh, Confederates could do was to try to strike them with bow and arrow. So one of the people who was standing guard, he was praying, and then the sentry on the other side hit him with an arrow in his leg, but he continued to pray. Hit him with the second arrow, continued to pray. And then his companion sort of, startled him and said, what are you doing? They're shooting arrows in you. He's like, Wallah, I didn't feel it. He was so into his prayer, his salah, that the pain of the arrow didn't even penetrate him. So again, that spiritual sweetness translated into a type of even physical sweetness. And it said that when Sayyidina Ali would be pierced by an arrow during battle, he would say, because you have to remove it, he said, let me pray and then remove it while I'm praying, because then I won't feel it. That was their anesthesia. Remove it while I'm praying. So this halawa could reach, according to Ibn Abi Jamrah, even a state, a physical thing, where you can almost really feel it within yourself. Obviously a high level of iman, and it has to be accompanied by a very high spiritual state. Yes? Certain surah of what? There's dua, and Surah Al-Fatiha is shifa. It's one of the names. It's called the Shafiya, the Quran, or the chapter that heals. One of the Sahaba even used that. They were returning from an expedition, and they came across a town that wasn't Muslim yet, and they asked them for diyafa, which is to let them come and be their guests, which was the Arab custom, and they refused. And so the Sahaba, they had to go camp out somewhere. But then they found someone from the village came running back and said, our chief is ill, maybe you can help, and so forth. And they said back, well, you didn't want to give us, our right of giving us being guests. But anyway, they went, and he read Surah Al-Fatiha for him, and he was healed. And when they went back to the Prophet ﷺ, he said, how did you know to read Surah Al-Fatiha? He said, I felt like the right thing to do. And the Prophet ﷺ acknowledged that. So it wasn't something even heard from the Prophet ﷺ, but one of the names of Al-Fatiha thereafter was Al-Shafi'iyya. So this halawa, it's a strong type of feeling. It could even be physical. And then the Prophet ﷺ mentions 3 attributes. I say attributes and not signs because man kunna fihi, so it's something in someone, it's a state. First 2 have the word love in them, and the third one has something that's akin to love, the opposite, which is hate. So none of the 3 are actions, if you notice. None of the 3 are something you do physically. Didn't say whoever, the one who tastes sweetness of faith will be the one who prays the longest, or fasts the most days, or gives the most in charity. None of those things are mentioned. The first, that the love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam is more than anything else. So it's as if that is an essential element of Iman, that you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala more than anything else. So someone asked before the class, what is that love? What's that about? How does that happen? People who I think we often confuse love with other things in our times. We confuse love with lust. We confuse love with deriving some type of benefit, things like this, and then we think that's love. It's not love. Love is having an inclination towards something, but based upon seeing in that thing something that draws you in a true sense. And it's talking more to your heart, to your spirit. It's not talking to your carnal desires or your lower desires or your passions. That's not love. It's something else. Imam al-Ghazali says that this love is based upon recognition of beauty. So people like beautiful things or love beautiful things, right? If we see people pay millions of dollars for a picture, a painting, a drawing or something, that because it looks beautiful to them or there's a meaning attached to it that they find to love, and so people are willing to pay a lot of money for that. People tend to their gardens and to their backyards and things and to their homes in a manner that they try to beautify it. People, the way they dress. No one really tries to dress in an ugly way, right? The fashion critics will say their say, but people don't do that purposefully, right? They think they're trying to dress in a beautiful manner. So that's at least from a physical aspect, but from an internal, spiritual aspect, to recognize beauty in character is what we're talking about here. The reason we love people like Allah, the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, even though we haven't seen them, right? So it's not really based upon physical description. We have some things about how the Prophet ﷺ used to look based upon his shama'il, but that's not the real reason. The real reason is recognizing beauty in character. When we hear about the Prophet ﷺ and it's said about him, كان لا ينتصر لنفسه وإنما كان يعفو ويصفح أو يعفو ويغفر. When we hear about him ﷺ, that he would never seek retribution on his own personal account, but he used to pardon and forgive. A person in a sound state of heart, that's a beautiful meaning. You cannot be helped but be attracted and inclined to that meaning. Even though you may feel that you are incapable of implementing that within yourself, but nevertheless you recognize that's a beautiful thing. And so if we think about, in terms of a form of a human being, the most complete human being in terms of all of those attributes and all of those inner realities is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No one can even compare. No one is even close. And so then our love for other people will be in as much as they're following or living up to that ideal of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it's enough of an honor for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he is joined in the same sentence with Allah. Right? Because it says that أن يكون الله ورسوله أحب إليه من سواهما. That Allah and His Prophet are more beloved. Didn't even separate them. So it was as if the meaning is, if you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you must love the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if you love the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you must love Allah. You can't claim one and then disclaim the other one. Otherwise it would be hypocritical. So if you love Allah, you love God, you have to love His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and all His prophets. مِمَّا سِوَاهُمَا. Then more than anything else. More than anything else. The Prophet ﷺ, he recognized this and he asked Umar one day, he said, Umar asked about love for him, and Umar remarked that you are more beloved to me except my own soul, except myself. And the Prophet ﷺ showed his dissatisfaction with that answer. Umar realized, and he said, no, even more than my own soul. And then the Prophet ﷺ nodded and said, now you understand. So that love of the Prophet ﷺ was something they all had, the great Sahaba, Umar and all of them. Abdullah and Umar would follow him and do everything like the Prophet ﷺ. We mentioned, I don't know if it was here or somewhere else, where he would go to the places where the Prophet ﷺ was and mark it with a black X, with tar. And when they excavated I was told by people who've seen this, when they excavated in Mecca, that they found the places in Medina where he did that. Still was there. But of course, they poured cement over it. وَأَنْ يُحِبَّ الْمَرْأَ لَا يُحِبُّهُ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ تَعَالَى. Another love. And to love a person and not to love him except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Didn't mention it in the commentaries I saw, but when I looked at the wording, and yuhibba al-mar'a, right? It didn't say believer, it didn't say Muslim, it didn't say man, it didn't say woman. It said mar' means man, but it means like human being, person, in this sense. So that meant to me that part of your sweetness of Iman is to love people. That's what it says. And yuhibba al-mar'a. Didn't say a believing person, didn't say a Muslim, didn't say a good Muslim, didn't say a bad Muslim, didn't say any of those things. Mar, person, human being. So part of Iman is loving humanity in general. Someone who thinks they love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but somehow hates human beings, right, and reviles them all the time, and doesn't like them, and keeps complaining about, oh, the people of our time, how terrible they are, and it's so terrible here, and all these people are so terrible, and yada yada yada. He didn't understand the hadith. To love the person, لا يحبه إلا لله. But why do you love them? You love them for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is where we hear a lot of strange stuff. When people talking about doing something for the sake of Allah, or loving for the sake of Allah, or despising, al-bughd fillah, despising for the sake of Allah, people make all sorts of claims. No, I'm doing it for Allah, akhi, fi sabilillah. Everything is fi sabilillah. And it's a nice thing, it sounds nice. We all like to justify our actions and say, fi sabilillah, it's for the sake of Allah, it's not for anything else, so forth. But what does that actually mean? What does it mean when you say I do it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or I do it out of love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam al-Ghazali says that in actuality, you're kind of doing it for yourself a little bit, even if you claim you're doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if you are looking for a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, some type of reward, it's going to come back to you, then it's a little bit for yourself. And he said that's a commendable state, if that's what you're really doing. If you're looking for a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though it has an effect on you, then that's a meaning of doing it for Allah. But it's not the most complete, right? The most complete is not even looking towards either the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the punishment or the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's kind of doing things just because. It's the thing you're supposed to do. It's the right thing. It's not about a personal, it doesn't become personalized. And this state can only be reached by someone, I think, who stops seeing themselves in the equation to begin with. There's no more ana to begin with. There's no more I and me. As long as there's a recognition spiritually of an I, of a me, of I'm doing this and I'm getting this and I deserve this and I'm entitled to this and I should be getting this and this person shouldn't be talking to me like this. So it's all centered around your own self-identity, seeing yourself. You'll not get that state. Only when you let go of yourself, right? It's no more I, and it's hawa. Right? One of the dhikr of some of the Sufis that people had an issue with when they used the word hawa. They said hawa is not a sentence, it means he. Right? You can say Allah, you can say La ilaha illallah, you can say all these things, but what's this hawa? But they realized, these people, that it's either ana or hawa. It's either me, I. Hawa means khalas, no more ana, no more me. I'm looking completely towards Allah. And the hawa, which is a pronoun, means he, but it symbolizes you're leaving the ana, leaving the me part of it, and then you're going towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it actually became one of their dhikrs, one of their remembrances of how they remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that level of love, doing it purely altruistically, not for anything that could come back to you, that's something else that few people can really claim. You know, there's always some type of ulterior motive. And you can intend one thing, but the actual motivator and ba'ith, the thing that's pushing you to do something, could be something completely different. So, loving humanity for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or loving a person, obviously our love will be different depending upon the person. The more that we see beautiful traits in them, then the greater love we will have. But you can actually love someone and dislike that same person from different aspects. Right? Just look at your relationships. There's things, you have either a spouse or you have children, or you have a brother, you have a sister, whatever, friends. There are certain things that you like, that you love about them, and certain things that you're not so crazy about. So there's a sort of mix of both love and dislike in the same person. So to love certain aspects of something, right, at the same time to dislike certain aspects of something doesn't mean that you no longer love that thing. And that's how we have to look at human beings, because there's always one aspect that is going to always be there, no matter how despicable you think they are. And that's their very humanity, and they've been endowed with a soul that is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the same way you are, no different. And that's a basic level. Right? When the funeral walked by and it was a Jewish person, and the Prophet ﷺ stood up and they said, "Why are you standing?" He said, "Alaysat nafsan?" Is it not a nafs? It's not a human being, it's a soul. There's a hurma, there's a sacrosanctity to the human being. No matter what their status is, what's going on inside, what their actions are, it's always there. That's why when we dehumanize people, right, when we dehumanize our enemy, to the extent we no longer see them as human, that is not Islamic, ever. You know, and the wisdom of our ancients, both in the Muslim faith and other faiths that say Don't hate your enemy too much, because one day the enemy could be a friend. And the Prophet ﷺ taught us how to do that. He had many enemies. They were enemies of his. He wasn't, he didn't have that feeling towards them. But like Hind bint Utbah, who arranged for the assassination of his beloved uncle Hamza, and then ate from his liver. What could be worse? Can you imagine someone do that to a relative of yours? Would you ever forgive them? Could you even imagine that? Can you even see that? He did, right? And he even spoke to her, talked to her. He did, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you have to be able to learn to see the humanity in everyone. That is the minimum. And then there's no one who's complete evil. I don't care what you say. There's no one who's complete evil. There's a little bit of evil in some people, and then there's good. He who's good is more than his evil is a good person. And he who's evil is more than his good is an evil person, at least for now. It can change. Right? So, our scholars told us this is not like a sirah, it's not a battle between good and evil in terms of, we have the heroes and the good people on one side, and we have the evil people on the other side, and we're here to battle it out. Ahl al-haq lid ahl al-batil. That's kind of a very simplistic way of looking at things. Nowadays, especially in the days we're living in now, times of fitan, times of tribulation and strife, and one of the definitions of fitna is you can't tell where the good is, where the evil is. Because there seems like a little bit on both sides. Wherever battle it is, whether it's a physical one or any other type of altercation or quarrel, people disputing, there's going to be a little bit here and a little bit there. That's fitna, where you can't tell. So then you have to look to what's really at stake here, and it's nufus. All of the troubles I think we're having now, it's a problem of souls striving to satiate their lower desires. All across the world, all across the board. Whether it's the Central African Republic, or whether it's the Middle East, or whether it's in Burma, or whether it's in any place in the world. I think all of that strife goes back down to one thing. People lose their sense of humanity, and they become no better than the very animals that are mentioned in the Quran. Right? Asfal as-safilin happens, the lowest of the low, when you stop acting like a human being. When you stop using the faculties you've been down with as a human being, and then you descend into something that becomes purely animalistic. That's what happens. But even when that happens to someone, it's not necessarily a permanent state. They could be lifted from that. If you don't believe that people can get out of that state, then you really don't believe in Islam, to be honest with you. Because we had people like that before, who were in these states, and Islam took them out of that, lifted them, made them into something completely different. Right? I think we gave the khutbah a few weeks ago. We said Umar radiallahu anhu, who used to bury his daughters alive, and on the night he became Muslim, he was on his way to kill the Prophet ﷺ. What could be worse than that? And he came back Muslim hours later.
I'm just really curious because I actually think about Umar a lot because I identify with someone. How do you actually build that compassion then? Was it like a miracle, or was there a transition for him? I just don't understand it. Because no matter how hard I try, I find myself always going back to some of my old states. And I keep trying to push myself forward. But it's hard to build that empathy and compassion when you've been trained to be defensive your whole life.
Maybe you should stop trying. Omar, he didn't try, really. He wasn't planning on it. It just happened. He was on his way, someone told him, oh, well, worry about your sister first because she's reading from the Quran and she's Muslim. So he went to his sister's house and her husband, and the husband hid somewhere, and they were reading from the Quran. They tried to hide it, but he figured it out, and he got even violent with her. And after he calmed down, he said, let me see what you're reading. And she said, well, you're not in a state where you can read. You have to make tahara, you have to take a bath or wash up. So he did that. And then he came back and he read from the pages of Taha. Taha ma anzalna alayka al-Qur'an litashqa illa tadhkiratan liman yakhsha. Right? So he read those verses and he was affected.
So it was the verses of the Quran that turned his heart around.
Allahu A'lam what turned his heart around. I think the verses of Quran partially did that. But I believe that when he went to the Prophet ﷺ, right, because he didn't say La ilaha illallah when he read the verses. He didn't claim his Islam then. He went to the Prophet ﷺ first. And when he knocked on the door, because they were in the Shi'ab, I think they were Dar in Arqam. So when he knocked on the door, and they said, who's that? And he says, Omar. People were like, what? Omar was a big deal. He was like, it's like someone knocking on the door now and it's like, someone, I don't want to say a name, but someone we would never expect to come to the masjid. So, Omar, Hamza, even Hamza, he was, there were two Muslims. When they became Muslim, the whole situation changed in Mecca for them. They said when Hamza and Umar became Muslim, we were able to go into the Kaaba and no one bothered us. They formed two lines, Hamza in front of one, Umar in front of the other, no one bothered them. They were like the heroes, the chivalrous knights of Mecca. So when they said Umar, so Hamza is the one who spoke. He said, well, if he wants good, ahlan wa sahlan, but if he wants something else, my sword is here too. So he was ready to. Well, when Umar walked in and he asked to see the Prophet ﷺ, I think that's the moment when he realized. And one thing you have to know, that people of Iman, people who have sweetness of Iman and who had it more than the Prophet ﷺ, they can change people just by looking at them. Bin nadra. They used to say, Can yurabbi bin nadra. You can change someone just by looking at them. If one of the people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just looks at you, right, it can change your whole life. Just like that. There's, we're all very much into really this self-help guru stuff and 10-step program and all that. I'm not denying any of that works, but also we have to make allowances for something that's even beyond that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the 10-step program. Things can change just like that. One of the Salihin, he was Fudayl ibn Iyad. He used to be a burglar, and he used to climb up the trusses of the house and steal things from people and things. So one time he was doing that, and then he heard someone reciting Quran, or he heard a voice saying, أَلَمْ يَأْنِ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَن تَخْشَعَ قُلُوبَهُمْ لِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. So the verse was like in a form of a question. Is it not time for those of belief, for their hearts to be reverent towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And he heard that and he changed. He said, Bala, now is the time. He went down and he never went back up, and he became one of the greatest people of Islam. So I think we'll stop here because it's time for Isha, inshallah, and we'll start again after this.
Basically, the nature of Umar can change, but when he was against Islam, when he became Muslim, like he used the same to defend Islam and Prophet.
Yeah, more or less. Yes. That's true.